This is the final hour. Again, rapid fire. You've listened so good. I mean, you're to be commended. I mean, you're just exceptional in terms of what you're doing, okay? And if you're like me, you're being challenged by these things, and it's hopefully helpful to you. We're going to enter again the temple of pleasure. And we're going to be listening and talking about the God of sex. This God is destroying lives all over the world. There have been times when I have preached on it and people got upset. There have been times when people were very uncomfortable. One lady came out to me and said, "Thank you." She said, "In my home, I grew up being kind of taught that it was nasty. That it was nasty, and I took that into my marriage." She said, "And it almost destroyed my marriage. Thank you for talking about it." I believe that preachers and teachers in the Lord's church need to talk about this stuff and need to talk about it very candidly, because we know more about it than the world does. We know more about it than the world does. We know how God intended for it to be. We know how to get the most out of it. And so we talk about these things. Let me share some beautiful things with you, helping you to see that God intended for sex to be beautiful when it's in its proper place. The first thing I want to stress is that it was God's idea. Have you ever thought about that? God is a God of sex. God was the one who made it. And God thought it was a good idea. And so for that reason, I don't have any problem talking about it. I don't have a problem talking about something that my God thinks is good. I have no embarrassment at all. I'm careful about what I say, but I'm comfortable talking about it because I know it's good. In fact, when He made Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 1, it said that He said to them, when you come down to verse 24, actually 27 and 28 of chapter 1, God created man in His own image. In the image of God He created him. Male and female He created them. Then God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And so it was God's idea, and God is the one who thought it up. Doesn't that make you love God all the more? And my prayer for you is that one day when you're married, you'll be real comfortable with this stuff, and you'll just say, "God, thank you. Thank you, God. You sure did good." Secondly, it is meant to be a mingling of the souls of two people, husband and wife. Genesis 2 and verse 24, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife, or be joined unto his wife." I can't really explain it, but when you are both Christians, and this is what you are enjoying in your Christian marriage, it's on a soul level. It's not just physical. It's on a soul level. It's the mingling of souls. I refer to it as the celebration. I call it the celebration of everything that man and that woman share together. They're loving God together. They're raising kids together. They're fighting life together. They're going to go to heaven together. And they celebrate all of that in this mingling of the souls of husband and wife. One man said it takes on a beauty and a resonance that we could never have imagined. It's totally the opposite of shame. We've been designed so that the level of intimacy that we have with our spouse is directly related to the depth of the intimacy that we have with Christ. In other words, it would not be surprising that a man prays to God and says, "God, I thank you for the union of me and my wife. But more than that, I thank you for the union that we have with you. The intimacy that we have with you." We've already seen that God uses sexual terms to talk about our relationship with Him. You committed adultery against me. You offered yourself to everybody who passed by. See, so God doesn't have a hard time talking about sexual things in connection with Him. It's a spiritual thing for those of us that are Christians. And then this point, He made it pleasurable. God did not have to make food taste good. He didn't have to make sex feel good. He chose to make it pleasurable. He could have made sex just like your hair growing. Any of you ever feel your hair grow? It grows a lot, but I don't ever feel it grow. So he could have made sexual relations where you have sexual relations, but there's nothing, no feelings attached to it. He made it pleasurable. In Song of Solomon, chapter 2 and verse 3, and I really believe this is a highly sexual book. I mean, God, wouldn't you expect God to talk about this in the Bible too? But look at something here. We learn right here that he makes it pleasurable. Song of Solomon, chapter 2 and verse 3. Like an apple tree among the trees of the woods, so is my beloved among the sons. I sat down in his shade with great delight, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. And so food terms are used to describe that this was good and it was pleasurable. It tasted good. It's not just for procreation. And what we mean by that is God didn't just say, I'm going to make it where this can be in your life, but it's for nothing more than having children. Certainly it is for having children. But God made it where it could be pleasurable at the same time. Only a good God would do that as a gift. Look at Proverbs 5. Proverbs 5, verse 18 and 19. Proverbs 5, verse 18 and 19 says, Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice with the wife of your youth. As a loving deer and a graceful doe, let her breast satisfy you at all times, and always be enraptured with her love. By the way, that word enraptured means to be intoxicated. And what God is basically saying when it comes to sexual things, He says it's all right with me if you're married, if you drink so much of it, you get intoxicated. He's good with it. He made it for a husband and his wife who are joined together, not only to each other, but also to the Lord. Be enraptured with her love. And I may point out this, we won't turn there for the sake of time, but in 1 Corinthians 7, he commands it. To the husband and his wife, he commands it. And he basically says, don't defraud each other. In other words, don't hold yourself back from her. Don't hold yourself back from him. And he says, if you do that, you sin. You know, we tell you young people, if you do it, you sin. If you do it, you sin. That's true for those of you that are not married. If you do it, you sin. But you know what he says to married people? If you don't do it, you sin. And what he basically says in 1 Corinthians 7, and I'm not trying to be crude, is he basically says in 1 Corinthians 7, I want you to do this. If you stop, I want it to only be for a short time, and I want you to get right back to it. Real simple commentary. I want you to do this, don't stop except for a little while, and then get right back to it. And the reason I want you to make it a short time, if you ever are apart from one another, is because I don't want you to lose self-control. Because if there's nothing in the kitchen, don't be surprised when somebody goes out to eat. And so God is saying, take care of your spouse. He made it not just for procreation, He made it for pleasure. And then this, but He severely restricted where that pleasure can be found. You know these verses. Proverbs 5, I do want to read that. Go to Proverbs 5, verse 15 through 17. Proverbs 15 and verse 17, just before the verses that said to be intoxicated with it. Verse 5, he says, drink water from your own cistern and running water from your own well. Should your fountains be dispersed abroad, streams of water in the streets, let them be only your own and not for strangers with you. You hear what he says? Drink water from your own cistern. One day you're going to get married, guys. Girls, you're going to get married. And what he's saying is you're going to have a cistern to drink from. I think this is a cistern out here where you turn in to come on to this road. That big block round thing up here, I think that's a cistern. It's designed to gather rainwater, and people can use it to water their garden, maybe even drink from it. And what he's saying in marriage is you've got a cistern to drink from. Drink from your wife. Drink from your husband. Don't go drink from somebody else's cistern. I gave you a gift, and that's your gift. And stay right there. He severely restricted it. And in Hebrews 13 and verse 4, what do I keep doing? In Hebrews 13 and verse 4, he says, marriage is honorable, and the bed is undefiled, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Do you hear the verse? Marriage is honorable, the bed is undefiled. God is saying there's nothing that happens in the marriage bed that I disapprove of as long as you and your wife are in agreement. but fornicators and adulterers I will judge. God says there's a place where it's good and beautiful and fine. There's another place where it's nasty and He'll judge you. The illustration I like to use is about a family that was putting down some sod. And they were putting down the sod out there in the yard, and they were laying down those little blankets of green sod, and a child heard Mom say, "That is beautiful sod." And so the child who heard that went out there and grabbed a big hunk of sod and brought it inside the living room and dropped it on the carpet. And she said, "Get that nasty dirt out of here." And the child was confused because he just heard Mama say that it was beautiful, and now she's calling it nasty. Why? Because sod belongs out there. It doesn't belong in here. And with sex, God says it belongs in here, inside the husband and wife who are lawfully married. It doesn't belong out there. In here, it's beautiful. Out there, it's nasty. Out there, I'll judge you, and you may lose your soul. You will lose your soul if you continue in that sexual sin. So, what God did is He severely restricted where it can rightfully be found. Galatians 5, he says, "Those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God." You know, a fish that's in a little fish bowl could wish that he was somewhere else. He might like to go be put out in the pool, out back in that big pool, so he can really swim around. But you put him out there in that big pool, and he's going to die because it's chlorinated. And sometimes we don't want to stay in that little area where God has put us. We want to take it elsewhere. We want to go experience all out there. I want to have multiple partners and multiple things and groups, and as some people do. And they find out that it's nothing more than a big cesspool that's full of filth, contaminated, and it destroys you. So God severely restricts where it can be found. God's gift given by His love, His gifts can go terribly wrong. It's like a parent who wants to give a child a gift that they know he'll love. He begs for it. "Oh, I want that so bad." And what he wants is a gaming console. And they get it and they give it to him. And he says, "Oh, it's wonderful. I love you. Thank you so much." And he just gives you the best hug. But then the next thing you know, he doesn't want to spend any time with you. He's withdrawn. And he's not satisfied anymore. Johnny has the update to this game. His is better than mine. And he's upset because now he doesn't have something as good as somebody else had. And you're thinking, how could a gift that was so good go so wrong? I just wanted to give him a good gift, and how did it go so wrong? How has this thing turned to something that I don't really like at all? Somebody has pointed out the gift has become a god. The god becomes a tyrant, and the tyrant then becomes a slave master. When you do not respect sex and handle it carefully, it can totally ruin your life. Diane Sawyer interviewed a lady a while back that was a prostitute. And she's talking about what she does as a prostitute. And Diane Sawyer said to her, "You're talking about things that most women would consider horrific, and you're smiling. How can you talk about these things and smile?" And the girl wouldn't respond. She just kept smiling. She just stared at her and stared at her and stared at her for about 7 seconds. The person telling about this said it was the most awkward 7 seconds I have ever seen on film. And she looks down at the floor and she starts sobbing. And the only thing that she can get through her sobs is, "I hate myself." You see what it had turned into? Go with me to 2 Samuel 13. One of the most tragic stories in all of the Bible. 2 Samuel 13. And this shows how sex, God's gift, can go terribly wrong. Not because of God. We are the ones who pervert it, not Him. We are the ones who pervert it. 2 Samuel 13 says, after this it was so that Absalom the son of David had a lovely sister whose name was Tamar. And it says Amnon the son of David loved her. Not so. The Bible used the word love. No, he does not love his sister. And if there was ever a verse that was an understatement, it says that in verse 2, Amnon was so distressed over his sister Tamar that he became sick, for she was a virgin, and it was improper for Amnon to do anything to her. Duh. Talk about an understatement? Yeah, it's improper for you to do something like this to your sister. He's got a friend whose name is Jonadab. Good friend, really good guy, good friend. And he says in verse 4, why are you, the king's son, becoming thinner day after day? Will you not tell me? And Amnon said, I love Tamar. I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. And what basically Jonadab says, why don't you just pretend to be sick, get David, your father, to send her to you and feed you there in the room. And while she's in the room, old buddy, you just go ahead and have your way. Anytime you covet sex that is not lawful, it's idolatry. Can I say it again? Anytime you covet sex that's not lawful, it's idolatry. In Exodus 20 and verse 7, you don't have to turn there, but I'll just tell you what it said. It said, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. So you can covet stuff besides money, and when you do, it's idolatry. He started off the Ten Commandments by saying, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And in that case, sex has become your God. You're coveting your neighbor's wife. And we said last night that if you don't button the top button right, none of the rest of them line up. We got to get this one right. Thou shalt not have any other gods before me. And if I get that lined up, I'm going to have a better time keeping the rest of those commandments. Tamar is a gift. Hear me? Tamar is a gift that's meant for somebody special. Young ladies, you are a gift. And you are meant for somebody special. And one day somebody is going to get to unwrap the gift. Somebody gets to unwrap the gift one day. But for now you need to be a gift that is wrapped up good and tight and solid with a bow. Tamar is a gift. She's not meant for Amnon. And he created a god out of her. I got to have her. I got to have her. And the rest is hard to read. She comes into the room. He forces himself upon her. He rapes her, basically, with pure old sinful lust. And then I want you to notice verse 15. Verse 15 says, then Amnon hated her exceedingly, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, be gone. See, now he's fulfilled, right? Now he's happy. Now he's satisfied, right? Nope. And I just want to say, and I'm not trying to hurt anybody, but there's a lot of people who know what verse 15 is all about. He said he loved me. He said this would be special. He said this would be wonderful. But it seems like just as soon as we got through with it, the relationship changed. I don't know whether it was shame or whether it was guilt or whatever, but the relationship changed. And a lot of times what happens is you don't stay together. Something that was supposed to be like glue wasn't glue at all. It wasn't glue at all. And you think, how could something that was supposed to be so wonderful go so terribly wrong? It says Amnon hated her. And it says that his hatred was greater than the love that he loved her with. He hates her now more than he loved her. Isn't that something? Here's what you need to understand, and I'm going to encourage you at the same time, but premarital sex, instead of it being glue, will destroy the relationship. Instead of closeness and intimacy, you'll experience loneliness. You won't be able to shake the feeling that you have given away part of yourself that you can never get back. And later on, when you marry, you may even have some flashbacks. You can't help them. They come into your mind. You see a picture of somebody that you were with in the past. You see them, you see their body, you see what you did. It runs like a video inside your head. And yet you've married the person that you really love with all your heart, and you just wish that you could get that stuff out of your head. There's no flashbacks when you keep yourself for one alone. Adultery destroys relationships. If it's adultery in a marriage, it'll destroy the relationship. It can destroy the family. It destroys everything. I'm a personal witness to what it can do and the tentacles that it has to destroy so many things. Everything in David's life spiraled out of control after this. David's family life just went haywire. But it all began with what? It began with idolatry. It began with idolatry. I've got to have her. She had become a god to him, a god of pleasure, and it destroyed everything. I love these points. Sex as a gift brings connection. As a god, it brings loneliness. Sex as a gift brings pleasure. As a god, it brings emptiness. Sex as a gift brings satisfaction. As a god, it brings slavery. As a gift, it brings intimacy, closeness, but as a god, it creates separation. As a gift, it brings unity. As a god, it oftentimes brings divorce. I want to talk about some other painful sacrifices to this god. Not only is this as a god, but people will make sacrifices for it. Look at some things people are willing to do. In 1 Kings 18, do you remember this when they had the prophets of Baal that were challenged by Elijah to that contest on top of the mountain? And they all cry out to their God, "Oh, Baal, hear us! Oh, Baal, hear us!" And he doesn't answer, and Elijah mocks and says, maybe you need to call a little louder. Maybe he's asleep or on a business trip or something. And where's your God? And they get so desperate that 1 Kings says in verse 25, when you come on down, we'll actually look at verse 28, they cried aloud and they cut themselves with knives, as was their custom, with knives and lances until the blood gushed out on them. Who in the world cuts themselves with knives and lances? Who cuts themselves for a god? Who is willing to inflict pain upon themselves to sacrifice to this god? Who does that? You look at that and you say, that's stupid. But it's not any stupider than what we do and what people all around us are doing. Let's talk about some sacrifices people are willing to make. Immodesty. I am so happy when young ladies finally admit that it is what it is. And they're no longer deceived by it. And young men admit what they're doing. Because guys can be immodest too. And deliberately choose to be immodest. That's why we say, no muscle shirts or whatever at camp. Because we know there's some guys that would love to come and she sees how bugged out he is here and he maybe can kind of look a little and see he's kind of cut. And he's doing the same thing. He's saying, look at me. Look at me. Look at me. Who's the God now? Proverbs 7 and verse 10. Proverbs 7 and verse 10. Proverbs 10 says, there was a woman who met him with the attire of a harlot and with a crafty heart. All I'm wanting you to say is that I'm not saying that, any of you have been guilty of dressing like a harlot. I don't mean that. But I do want to say this. Why did she dress that way? Why not wear a big long fur coat or something? Why is she dressing that way? Well, it's clear why she's dressing that way. She's dressing that way because it advertises what I want you to do. I want you to look at me. I want you to desire me. Now, you may not go that far. You may be just saying, I just want them to think I'm pretty. But still, look at who the God is. The God is you. You've set yourself up as a God to be looked at and bowed to and looked at and admired and worshipped. You see, it gets strong, doesn't it? Kylie Basutti Don't know her. But my understanding is that she's a former Victoria's Secret's runway angel. She's one of these that will walk out on the stage and she will model the Victoria's Secret lingerie. So she's wearing lingerie on stage, parading out there before all of these men and showing this lingerie. But she turned her back on this profession. She turned her back and she left it. Here's what she said. My body should only be for my husband. And look at the language that she uses. It's just a sacred thing. Are you kind of amazed at how many spiritual words we're finding in this stuff? See, you didn't think that you could be an idol worshiper, did you? You thought that was old-timey stuff, didn't you? I did too. My faith is more important, and I want to honor Him in what I'm doing. And I don't feel that I'm honoring Him when I'm half naked. She says it really, really, really well. And she says, I didn't really want to be that kind of role model for younger girls that were looking to me and then thinking it was okay for them to walk around and show their bodies in lingerie to guys. People make painful sacrifices to that God. Immodesty. Clothing professes something. You remember in 1 Timothy 2, it says that a woman is to wear that which professes godliness. You know, when a woman wears when she's got scrubs on, when she's got on that, I think, well, she's a nurse. If I see a guy and he's got grease on him and he's got blue uniform, he's a mechanic. I look at people sometime and I can tell by what they wear what they are. They're professing something. And the Bible says that when you wear certain things, you are professing something. You're saying something about who you are. And that is where a lot of people are willing to make the trade-off. You may feel a certain power when you walk in front of guys, and as you walk by, you can just feel them looking at you. But I can guarantee you, if you'll think long and hard, you'll get to where you hate it. Because you know that they're not loving you, they're lusting for you. And you'll get to where you hate that. Because I'm better than that. I mean more than that. To my God, I mean more than that to myself. And so that's very important to know. Let's move on. Wish I could talk about it more, but pornography. A $10 billion a year industry. Pornography. More than likely, there's several in here today who look at pornography on a regular basis. A while back at a youth camp for leaders to develop young men as leaders, we're not talking about guys who are worldly. We're talking about guys who care about Jesus. We're talking about guys who want to preach. We're talking about guys who want to teach. We're talking about guys who really do care. But they were just asked honestly about pornography. And a good number of them admitted that they had looked at it or do look at it, ashamedly, but look at it on a somewhat regular basis. Pornography is worship. It is coveting what is not yours to have. And Jesus, turn to Matthew 5, beginning in verse 27. Matthew 5, beginning in verse 27. Jesus said, you have heard it said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her, that's pornography, among other things, has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you, for it's more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. If your right hand causes you to sin, click, 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 click. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. What Jesus is basically saying is you will have to take radical amputation. Cut this out of your life. Because he says it'll be better to enter into heaven with just one hand than to enter into hell with both. It'd be better to go to heaven with just one eye than enter into hell with both. Cut it out of your life. As a preacher, I have sat across from men who have cried their eyeballs out because of what this God was doing to their life. Listen carefully. Sex was meant to be based on a relationship. God wanted sex to be a part of a relationship. It is not for your private and selfish experience. Let me ask you this question. What does that woman on your cell phone that's opened herself up for you to see, what does she care about you? What does she care? You got something good with her? She love you? Is she going to help you? Is she going to rescue you when you're in trouble? Will she die for you? No, she's just a thing. I've reduced her to a body only. Now, I know I'm preaching kind of strong on that, but I'm just trying to tell you, why? Bounce your eyes away. Cut it out of your life. Save yourself. If you're doing that today, stop it. Ask for help. Confess it. Get somebody to hold you accountable. Save yourself for the person that you marry. Then this one, fornication. A while back I did a series and I had 2 quotes. One girl says, I would do anything, to forget the sexual experiences that I had. No, this is a guy. To forget the sexual experiences I had before I met my wife. The truth is, I have been married to this wonderful woman for 8 years and I have never been alone with her in the bedroom. Do you understand what he says? I've been married to her 8 years and I've never been alone with her in the bedroom. Why? Because I keep thinking about other people. Right in the middle of something, somebody else's face comes in my mind. Then another person says, I am no longer with my sexual partner, but I consider it one of my most foolish acts to have someone walking on this earth who was one with me, but is no longer with me. He has a part of me that I cannot get back. Now let me just say this to you. If you have done this, if you have been guilty of this, don't beat yourself up. Ask God's forgiveness, repent totally, and be what I call a technical virgin. Decide that no more. I messed up. Yes, I messed up, but no more. From this moment on, I'm saving myself for the man I'm going to marry. And I want to tell you, he's going to appreciate that. And guys, let me tell you something. Most guys I know want to marry a virgin. Most guys I know, when they get married, they want to marry somebody who's never been touched. But do you realize what you do every time you're with somebody and you do that? Now you got to X that off the list because you said you wanted to marry a virgin and you just corrupted her. I'm saying she can still be something beautiful and will be. But I'm just saying that it's inconsistent to say, I want to marry a virgin, and then you're just Xing people out by the way you're living. See, if that's you, and that's what the world's doing. That's what the world's doing. God's just trying to give you something beautiful. You can swim in the ocean or you can swim in a mud hole. It's up to you. Do you want an ocean or do you want a mud hole? I'll take the ocean. Adultery. Real quick, like Proverbs 7 just mentions concerning this man that he went after her like an ox going to the slaughter. And he did not know. He did not know that it would take his life. He did not know that it would take his life. That's all in Proverbs 7, 21 through 23 and 24 through 27. People will sacrifice their spouse, sacrifice their children, sacrifice the rest of the family. All right, let's move. Questions. How well do you control your thought life? What sites do you visit on the internet when you're by yourself? Has the pursuit of sexual pleasure become an obsession to you? Is it the subject of your last thought at night and your first thought in the morning? Do you daydream about it at work or school? Are you willing to spend money on it? Are you willing to risk your career? Are you willing to risk your marriage for it? What is lacking in your intimacy with God? Do you draw near to God to lead you out of this temptation? The truth of the matter is that the ultimate path away from a false God is the path to the true one. Walk away from the false God and walk toward the true one. I like what Jesus said. Jesus said to a woman who had been guilty, caught in the very act of adultery. He stooped down and he wrote on the ground, and he ended up saying to that woman, go and sin no more. He can set you free, and he can write a new ending for your life. All right. Zoom, let's go a little bit more. You hang with me about 10 more minutes or so, maybe 15, we're done. At Mount Sinai, they built a calf and they worshiped it. And you say, who in the world would build a calf, a cow or a bull or something like that? Who in the world would do something like that and then worship it? Isn't that silly and ridiculous? And they make it their God and they give it credit for bringing them to where they were. They said, this is the God that brought us out of Egypt. They give it credit for everything. You say, who would do that? That's silly. Not making too much of it, but do you know that second picture right there is at Wall Street? Bull. Yeah, well, they didn't mean that when they put that up. They probably didn't. May not have. Still kind of eerie, isn't it? Still kind of interesting. We enter the temple of power and we talk quickly here about the God of money, success, and achievement. It's kind of interesting when you think about this. I kind of think this is funny. Let's go worship Moolah. Almost sounds like a false god, doesn't it? Let's worship Moolah. That's what we call it. And what do we sometimes refer to a dollar bill as? The almighty dollar. Folks, do you hear it? Do you hear it? Do you hear it? Again, money itself is not immoral, it's amoral. Remember 1 Timothy 6? He gives us richly all things to enjoy. Turn to 1 Timothy 6. 1 Timothy chapter 6. 1 Timothy chapter 6, beginning in verse 6. Godliness, that's being pointed toward God always. Your compass is always pointed toward God. You have a Godward attitude. Godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain that we will carry nothing out. Somebody one time said concerning a guy in a casket who was rich, somebody said to another guy right beside him, I wonder how much he left. And the other guy turned and said, all of it. That's how much he left. He left it all. He didn't take any of it with him. Having food and clothing, we shall be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare and into many foolish and harmful lusts that drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness, and they have pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Quickly, I'll tell you a couple of stories Jesus told. Remember the story of the rich fool? In Luke chapter 12, Jesus is hammering away. Listen, Jesus is hammering away on some great topics. If I was preaching, these should be things that would have you on the edge of your seats. I'm teaching you that one day everything that you have covered is going to be revealed. Everything you've done in private, God is going to show to the whole world one day. Would that have your attention? And I'm preaching to you about not fearing those who can kill the body, and after that they have no more that they can do, but fear him who can destroy both body and soul in hell. Wouldn't that have you on the edge of your seat? And I'm telling you that if you deny him, he'll deny us. I'm preaching about that. And I end up saying, whoever blasphemes the Holy Spirit can never be forgiven. Would you be wondering about what that is? And then look at Luke chapter 12 and verse 13. Right in the middle of a sermon like that, right in the middle of a sermon like that, it says, one from the crowd said to him, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. I remember one time hearing Gary Ogden preach in the pulpit here. And he said right there at that point, he said, where'd that cat come from? I mean, here Jesus is preaching a powerful sermon, and a guy interrupts the sermon and says, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Where'd that cat come from? And Jesus says in verse 14, Man, who made me a judge or an arbitrator over you? Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of things that he possesses. And he goes on and talks about this man who said, What shall I do since I have no room to store my crops? I will do this. I will pull down my barns. I will build greater. Somebody said he had a bad case of eye strain. I and my. I will say to my soul, by the way, that's the only one he got right. That's the one thing that'll last. He'll take it with him in eternity. I'll say to my soul, So you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. Verse 20. But God said to him, You fool, this night your soul will be required of you. And then whose will these things be which you have provided? And so is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. A true sign of an idol is when we look to it to do what God was meant to do for us. This man, money was his security. I have many goods laid up for many years. Don't we do the same thing? If I can just save enough, if I can just accumulate enough. And after all, the economy may collapse and my health may fail, or a terrorist attack might take place. I might lose my job. And so we start looking for ways to make ourselves secure instead of looking to God. And that's when God has taken away and another God has taken its place. And we say that we can take care of ourselves, we can handle our own needs. God is good, but God is not necessary. My question is, what about when it's gone? Years ago in the Great Depression, there were some people who took their lives because they lost everything. Laura's granddaddy, Albert Woodruff, told me one time, he said, Jeff, he said, when the Great Depression came along, he said, we never did know it. He said, we'd been in one all along. What he was saying was we were poor, and so when the Depression came along, we never knew it happened. We still were where we had always been. We didn't have anything. We didn't have anything when it came. But there were people who killed themselves because they had lost their sense of security. It's in cases like that it has become your God. He looked for it to be his satisfaction. Look at Ecclesiastes 5:10. Ecclesiastes 5:10. Here it is. Circle it, underline it, do whatever you do. Ecclesiastes 5:10. He who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance with increase. If you love abundance and it increases, you still won't be satisfied. This also, he says, is vanity. The more you feed this God with money, the more you feed it with houses and cars, the hungrier it gets. It's never satisfied. But we think that it'll satisfy, but it just won't satisfy. Somebody once said the belief that high income is associated with a good mood. That idea is widespread, but it is mostly illusory, which means it's just not so. There's people who get a lot more income, but their mood never gets better. And he last looked for it to be his significance. We do the same thing. We find identity in our stuff. We even identify ourselves by what we do. Hey, I'm Valerie. I'm an interior decorator. Oh, that's what you are? That's who you are? That sums up who you are? My understanding is that our surnames began that way. John the Miller became John Miller. Peter the Baker became Peter Baker. We sometimes judge ourselves by our net worth. I had a guy the other day and I thought, what are you doing? I'm at a funeral. This guy's talking to me. I asked him about his life. He talks about how that he's got this company. He said we almost went broke. People told us to get out 3 or 4 times. He said last year it did so many million. I don't have many guys that want to tell me that. And I got the idea that somehow he was wanting to tell me that because it just seemed like to me that it made him feel significant. Interestingly enough, during the funeral, I talked about stuff and how stuff doesn't satisfy, and it never will. His wife came up to me afterward and said, "Thank you for that message." Just made me wonder if his wife was on a little different page, or wanted to be, than he was. I just want you to know this. I can get kind of emotional thinking about it. Jesus forever settled your significance when he died for you on the cross. In this, the love of God is manifested toward us. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. I don't have to prove anything to anybody. Jesus died for me. I am somebody because I'm his child. And if you can get secure in that, you don't have to have money and things and sex and power and all. You don't have to. I know I'm significant. In Mark 10, this man came to Jesus and he said, I've done all these things. What lack I yet? He told him, to honor his father and mother and all those kinds of things. And all these things I've kept from my youth. What lack I yet? And in Mark 10 and verse 21, it says, Jesus looking at him loved him. I like that. Jesus looking at him loved him and said to him, one thing you lack. Go your way, Sell whatever you have, give to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. And come take up your cross and follow me. But he was sad at this word, and he went away grieved, for he had great possessions. Listen to me. This is the only place in Scripture I ever read of Jesus telling a guy that if he wants to follow him, you got to sell everything. I don't recall him ever telling anybody that. Why did he tell that guy that? I won't tell you why he told that guy that. Because he knew that his real God was in his pocket. And so he pegged him. What lack I yet? Go sell all you have. His real God was in his pocket. And when he heard that, the Bible said that he was grieved. And he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. Jesus had pegged his God. He thought he loved God. He thought he loved God supremely. He thought God was the God of his life, but it wasn't. You see, he had it all. He was a rich, young ruler. But what he wanted to be was a rich, young, saved ruler. And Hollywood does it all the time. First of all, I'd like to thank my God. First of all, I want to thank my Lord and Savior. And I kind of like hearing that. But I know what some of those people do the rest of the time. And so what they want to do is, I've got all this success, I've got all of this fame, and guess what? I'm spiritual too. That's what this guy wanted. I want to be a rich, young, saved ruler. His God was in his pocket. Initially, what we're saying here when it comes to money, Jesus said you can't serve God and mammon. Jesus said, blessed are those who are poor in spirit. They realize they're spiritually bankrupt. They're the ones who will be blessed. They're the ones who will be blessed. And really what God says to us, listen carefully, and the lesson will soon be yours. We're going to hit a couple more things. Jesus is saying it is me or the money. You choose. You can't serve both God and mammon. This man walked away. Let me ask you some questions. How do you define success? What drives you? What motivates you? To what extent are your dreams and goals driven by money? How will God measure your success? Is God impressed by your achievements? Does a lack of productivity frustrate you and make you feel bad about yourself? Do you seek God's glory or do you seek your own? Do you ever envy successful people? How often do you compare what you have and what you make to other people? How much anxiety do finances add to your life? Are you good at giving money away? Are you rich toward God? This man we just read about wanted to be the king of the hill, but he found out the king of the hill was not so fun. And it occurs to me that there's only one real king of the hill, and we won't ever topple him. There was a king that died on a hill, and he died for you. He is truly the king of the hill. It's our Lord. And Jesus can give you security. Jesus can give you significance. And Jesus can give you satisfaction. I'm going to hit this one real fast. The temple of family. We're to love God with all of our heart, but the problem is so many times we'll put family above God. Matthew 10, Jesus talked about that. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Here again, family is meant to be a great gift, but it can become competition. According to a Barna survey, 7 out of 10 adults would choose their earthly family over God. Here's what I want to say to you quickly. I love Susan best when I love God first. My life is better because I love God supremely. I believe I do. Hope I do. The worst day in Susan's life would be if I walked in and said, Susan, I'm done. I'm not doing it anymore. I'm leaving it all. I don't want to serve God. I don't want to serve Jesus. She would all of a sudden know that everything's going to go bad now. And you can get to a situation where you can elevate family over God. This guy is a guy that I know. I changed his wife's name, but he wrote me one time and he said this. What will my relationship be with Reagan in heaven? There's something that troubles me very much. I know this. Reagan is my single most joyous and deepest love that I've ever had here on earth. We are two people that are a team of one, plugging away at every effort to raise our children together, make decisions together, get to heaven together, spend every moment together as much as she can. She has been my lifelong study project, and I can hardly bear any moment when she's not even in the room with me. I have been truly blessed with such a relationship. I know we are not the same, and heaven is so wonderful that our earthly life will never measure up. However, I can't help but be sad thinking that our existence could be anything without each other. Here's a guy who's just saying, is heaven going to be missing something because she's not my wife there? And he's struggling as he thinks about heaven without her as a wife, because Jesus says there won't be marriage in heaven. I wrote back and said, I believe we will know our wives in heaven, but there will be no marriage or fleshly needs. I think we will see them as very special sisters who helped us arrive at His throne. All our needs will be satisfied by the eternal Lord. I think we will always remember our special love, but it is superseded by the love of the Lord. He said, it is harrowing to think that the devil can use, in his deceptiveness, can even take something so wonderful as my marriage and my love for wife and use it as a distraction for me. I wanted so badly to just love her for eternity that the thought of an existence without that agape relationship with Reagan would be somehow less fulfilling. He said, the devil made even my great marriage something that in some ways served as a distraction away from what's got to be number one in my life. As we finish, I want to ask you this. Can you think of a man in the Bible whose love for God was tested supremely with family? Can you think of a man who was tested to see if he would love his son more than God? Did any of you say Abraham? When he had that boy, he swelled up with pride. And I believe that little boy's birth, Isaac, brought a lot of worship to God. But here's a wealthy man who's going to be tested right there. He's happily married, but he's not going to be tested there. If anything will pull Abraham's eyes away from the Lord, it will be this child. God calls upon him to go and offer his son, whom you love. And by the way, that's the first time the word love is used in the Bible. First time it's used. Your son, whom you love, and offer him as an offering to me on the mountain of Moriah. Let me ask you something. If that was your son, what would be your choice? He gets up early, he leaves, and it must have felt like a funeral procession. And he said this, he said, the child and I are going to go yonder and worship. Abraham knows that what he does there is going to be an ultimate act of worship. When you choose God over everything and everyone, you have defined worship. The text doesn't say anything about how he felt. It doesn't talk about his anguish. It doesn't talk about anything. It just says he got up early and he went to do it. We quickly talk about some times when money can become, or family can become a god. We're going to zoom here, okay? When you look to another family member to make you happy. When family keeps you from obeying the gospel of Jesus Christ. I've had people to say, well, my mama never obeyed, or my uncle never obeyed, or my grandmama never obeyed, and I'd be condemning them. Well, basically what you're saying is I love them more than I love the gospel. I understand the struggle, I understand the difficulty, but family's keeping you from obeying the gospel. When your disordered love hinders you in disciplining your children. God has told me to discipline them, but I just can't do it. I just love them too much to spank them. No, you don't love them at all. When we are weakened to endorse the sins of family, there's people who will endorse the sins of family members because they love them more than they love God. When family causes us to interfere with church discipline, the church needs to discipline my child has walked away from the Lord, they need church discipline, and I'm going to get in the way. I've got a friend who preaches in a place, and his daughter, this preacher was telling about a man's daughter who committed adultery with a man in the congregation. They were going to have to exercise church discipline because she would not repent of it. One day at church, my friend is mulling around, and he's obviously distraught, upset, because he's going to have to read a letter that day about the church's withdrawal from her. And the daddy of that daughter walks up to him and said, Gary, what's wrong with you? And Gary said, well, I've got to read something difficult today. He said, is it about my daughter? He said, yes, it's about your daughter. He said, tell you what, Gary, let me read it. Let me read it. I love my daughter, but I want these people to see that I love my God more than anything in this world. When you desire to showcase your children. I preached one time in Plant City, Florida, and as I'm preaching, I'm looking out the doors. I can see it. There's a baseball complex right in front of the church building, and there's tons of kids out there on a Sunday morning with their parents, not worshiping God. They're on a baseball field. And a lot of that is because they're living vicariously through those children. My child's going to be a superstar athlete, and I want the world to know it. It's all about the God of me. When we go to our family bubble and we have no time left for eternal family, when you can spend all the time with your family, but you can't spend any time with the children of God. There's a song that we sing, and we finish right here. We never can prove the delights of His love until all on the altar we lay. You're never going to experience the love of God to the greatest degree until everything is laid on the altar. Abraham laid everything on the altar. And what's interesting about that, do you know what mountain chain that was where Abraham did that? It was called Mount Moriah. Jesus was crucified on that same mountain chain. Can't prove it, but it might be very close to the spot. But I know it's on the same mountain chain. It's interesting to me that on the same mountain chain where Abraham laid it all down, Jesus laid it all down for you. You won't get any greater love than that. Romans 8 and verse 32. He who did not spare His own Son, but delivered Him up for us all, how shall He not with Him freely give us all things? What person or people mean the most to you in this world? What sacrifices do you make for them compared to the sacrifices you make for Jesus? Can you truly say that your love for them is lesser than your love for the Lord? Since God is asking that spiritually they be laid on the altar as a testimony of your overriding love for Him, will you do it? Will you lay everything on the altar? If you loved God more, could you love your family better? See, when you love God the most, you can love your family better. I've got a friend who left everything worldly. His wife couldn't stand it because he'd become a Christian, and he told her, everything's going to be better. Just let me figure this out. I'm going to treat you better, love you better. Everything's going to be better. You can love people better when you love God the most. There's our lesson. Wow, what a lot of material. But have you got something that you can take? Do you at least walk away today saying, you know, I'm thinking a little bit different about this stuff. I think I'm going to be asking myself more, is this the God of my life? Is this competing with God? Has this become an idol to me? I hope that at least you can do that. And if you can, that'll be a great thing. Thank you so very much. And God bless the church at Gardendale for having me to come. I basically squeezed about 10 sermons into 4 lessons. That was not easy, okay? And thank you for bearing through it. God bless you.